record it.
Got it.
Awesome. So we'll start by just doing a quick review of the agenda, and then I think we need to, and Angela, correct me if I'm wrong, even though we haven't had a quorum for our first two meetings, still accept the meeting minutes?
Correct. We should vote on those.
Okay. So we will start off by entertaining motions for the meeting minutes. I'll give a quick overview of just where the first two committee meetings have gone. I gave the same kind of quick overview at the last Forest Health committee meeting, but it's a good place to start of just capturing some early conversations. Angela and Courtney can give us a quick update on the all program spreadsheet and some of the work that DNR is doing to streamline and capture all of the various forest health funding programs. And then we also have Erin Greene and Diana Selby with the Colorado State Forest Service, just as we work on some recommendations and strategies as a subcommittee here. It will be great to make sure that we are working in tandem with the Colorado State Forest Service staff. So Erin and Diana, thanks so much for joining. It'll be great to just hear some thoughts from you all. And then I also included a link from a statement that Chief Randy Moore with the U.S. Forest Service made on July 22nd, really focused on changing matching requirements that I think would be great for this group to discuss. And then to wrap up our hour, it will be, we've included some time for a group discussion just to really talk more about the committee direction and start lining up some solid next steps as to where we want to spend and prioritize our time. So with that, I think we need to entertain motions for the first two meeting summaries, the first being the May 9th meeting minutes that are attached to the email I sent this morning.
I'll make that motion to accept and approve those meeting summaries from the last, I think it was, do you want me to name the meeting times or?
Let's do them as one together, I think is great, but May 9th and June 22nd.
For May 9th and June 22nd, 2022, to accept both meeting summaries into the record as approved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Who was that? Sorry.
I can.
Okay, Christina Burry, second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? It looks like we have a unanimous passage. So thank you, everyone. So quick update from me on just where this subcommittee has been. So as a recap, when we look at the council's priorities, the subcommittee on leveraging resources falls under, and I'm just going to read this out. It's item 6 on the committee's tasks in the legislative piece of legislation that created the Forest Health Committee. And it's identification of strategies for building sustained capacity to conduct forest restoration and wildfire mitigation work at scale through collaboration across multiple agencies, organizations, jurisdictions, public-private partnerships, innovative public and private funding vehicles, shared stewardship, and other solutions with an emphasis on leveraging and maximizing the impact and reach of state funding. So that's the driving force behind this subcommittee. And we've also identified in some previous discussions that the strategies that this committee may recommend may also touch some of the landscape scale planning efforts that were within the legislative declaration, and then identifying opportunities to promote synergy across forest-based collaboratives. So we've identified those additional tasks of the Forest Health Committee that may likely touch some of the strategies that we recommend. And during our first two meetings, we've talked about two offshoots of where this committee may spend some time. And one is the development of shared strategies or visions for how resources and funding are directed on the ground. So as we look at the amount of funding that's available and strategies to make matching more simplified, how do we support either local and state entities in moving in one direction with that funding? So some of the pieces that have come up during those conversations are, how do we support the broad knowledge of standard risk assessment or mapping processes, or standardized science-based approaches and GIS optimization tools that can help connect the dots as communities are leveraging resources. So that discussion has been recommending more so a shared strategy or framework that can be useful to communities. And we've discussed, at various scales of where that would be applicable. But that's the first, I guess, conversation point. And then the second has been looking at existing funding streams and identifying any barriers to either leveraging those resources together or making those current funding streams most useful to our communities. And so that's where we'll have some of the updates from the compilation of resources that DNR has put together in the all program funding spreadsheet. And there may be strategies that this group may recommend on how that all program spreadsheet is distributed, or how it could be best used by our communities. So those are sort of the two pathways. And again, this committee has had 2 meetings so far, and we haven't had full participation. So I would say, we've included a decent amount of time on today's agenda to hear from the full group on. Those are some of the discussion points that we've had, but I think we want to hear more from the other members of this subcommittee. So I will pause there, and I'm happy to answer any clarifying questions, but we do have a good chunk of time at the later part of our agenda to discuss this more. So I want to make sure we stay on track, but also want to let any others from the early meetings sort of correct or add any commentary to my quick summary there as well. Sounds good.
I think you captured it well.
Great. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on. Again, we'll have more time to discuss where we go next. But I wanted to turn it back over to Angela and Courtney to give, we talked about this briefly at our last meeting, but to give an update on DNR's all program spreadsheet and any other efforts that DNR is doing to streamline the availability of resources for all of the forestry programs. So I'll turn it over to you all.
Yeah, and I'll let Courtney take the wheel here. She's really been our steward of the all programs database that we've put together and are posting publicly on our website. But after Courtney, if you would like to present a little bit, I'd love to also pass it to Diana, because probably, gosh, a couple of months ago, we were in conversations with the State Forest Service about updates to their grants database and how to create something that is user-friendly. And, I think we still need to keep having those conversations. So any direction, I think, from this group is going to be really helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. I'm happy to start explaining the compilation that I've been working on. So in September, the Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Program really started developing its priority areas and its criteria for funding. And we realized there were going to be some areas and some applicants and some projects that weren't going to be appropriate for co-swap funding. And so we wanted to create a compilation of resources and programs that everyone could go to and hopefully get funding or assistance on projects that they're trying to get done. And so I've started putting together this compilation of resources. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just so you all can see how to find this document, and then I'll share the link so you can look through it directly. Maybe. Okay, can you all see the co-swap page? Okay, great. So this is the page for the Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Program, and at the bottom under supplemental information is where we have our link to other wildfire mitigation funding opportunities. If I open it up, you can see that the funding opportunities have been organized by state funding, federal funding, and then private funding. I've tried to include information that people find most useful, but if you all have suggestions for things to add or different ways to assess these programs, please let me know. Right now, I think some of the things that are most useful are eligible land and eligible applicants. So people here can see, is the land they're interested in doing mitigation work eligible for each program? Under what is funded, it's sort of a narrative of the program and what sort of funding opportunities are available. I know that having a filter for specific mitigation activities would be really useful, but also that's a big investment of time. So I haven't quite gotten to that point yet. But right now, people can read through each opportunity and hopefully get a better idea if their program and project would be eligible. We also have match requirements, which I know is really useful for people, and deadlines for upcoming grant applications, or if it's annual, that sort of information is on here too. So I'm going to share the link now so you all can look through this yourselves. Putting it into the chat. And so this is really focused on wildfire mitigation projects. We don't have any programs here that support things outside of wildfire mitigation. So I know there's lots of other forest health programs, watershed focus programs, programs on wildfire response, programs that support firefighters. And so none of those appear here. This is really just mitigation focused. I know that the State Forest Service has their all grants database, and I think that's a little bit broader. And so we really wanted to create something, at least for co-swap applicants, that was focused in on mitigation work. So people could come here to find funding for forest thinning or fuel breaks or things like that. So if anyone has questions, I'd love to answer them, or if you guys have suggestions on ways to make this better, and would love to hear those too.
Anyone have questions or thoughts for Courtney? Thanks so much, Courtney.
I do. Courtney, looks like a great comprehensive list. I'd forgotten about some of these. We might look into the private side for, I'm not sure, does the Nature Conservancy fit into the private side, or how do their, like, maybe they don't have grants, they just have programs?
Yeah, I can definitely connect with the Nature Conservancy. I think one of their staff members is on the Forest Health Council, and so I can connect with her to see if there's anything that belongs on this list.
Yeah.
Would agreements in general be worth putting on the list under federal agencies?
That's a good question, John. Maybe I can connect with you after this to hear more about the agreements you're thinking of. I thought this tool would most be useful for individuals, organizations, and government entities. So if those sorts of agreements can benefit those groups, I definitely think they belong on here. So if you wanted to share some of those with me, I'd be happy to add them. So I can connect with you after this meeting, John.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, especially with, we haven't had matching requirements, but the U.S. Forest Service, and with that, you know, the letter later on when we're talking about they're dropping those requirements as well. It wouldn't be for individual landowners, but more for nonprofits, states, tribal, you know, municipalities kind of deal. But I think it'd be worth putting on there.
Definitely. Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm, I think, less familiar with the federal program, so I'd be excited to connect with you about those.
Sounds good.
And Courtney, this is Pat Dorsey. I was just wondering if we hear about new grants or funding opportunities, would the best thing just to be to share that information with you in kind of the same format and you can add it? I mean, chances are you're on top of it, but every once in a while, I'll see something that I hadn't seen before.
100%. I would love for people to send me changes or updates or new programs. At the very bottom of the page, I've included my email address, so anyone can email and send me new programs. I'm working on sort of a cover page that describes how to use this tool, and then asking people to send in resources that aren't listed. So Pat, I would definitely like to hear about new things. I would like to think that I'm on top of it, but with all the other things I'm working on, I know that I'm missing opportunities, and also missing small changes that happen that I don't always catch.
I guess I think this looks like a really great list. It's focused on wildfire mitigation opportunities, and just sort of, there's also people from DFPC on the call, but as in the interest of making this like a forest health council, there's lots of other grants that are forest health related that aren't maybe on your list. I can think of, there's probably some programs within like Colorado Parks and Wildlife even, right? Forest habitat grants and things like that. So I don't know, this maybe serves that purpose. I don't know how it overlaps with DFPC, or if there's a need to create a longer sort of forest health list, or that's something the State Forest Service already has. But just wanted to make that clarification and confirm that was kind of your intent, is to make this more wildfire focused and not as much forest.
Yeah, the original intent was all around mitigation programs. I think, you know, if the Forest Health Council decides that what's really needed is a compilation that's all forest health, then I think we can decide the best place for that to live. So far, I have found programs that aren't on the State Forest Service grants database yet, so I want to keep this live for now. But I know there's been talks about sort of combining it with the all grants database and then not having the sort of duplicative structures. And so maybe Diana can speak to the Forest Service's plan to update their database, because that might be the best place to have all of the grants listed.
That's a great point, Brett. And maybe another thought is through DNR is also working on sort of, I think it's called the Water Opportunity Navigator. And I'm wondering, you know, I don't think they need to be combined, but somehow crosswalk to each other just with the watershed overlap as well. So maybe that's, you know, just a pinpoint of a discussion of how to make sure that some of these different funding navigators at least point to each other potentially.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much more time, but just maybe circling back to John Ring's comment. I think it was his comment earlier about other just agreements, just clarifying that this is kind of a list where people could look if they want to get money themselves, but there's lots of other kinds of support or you know, assistance that people could get in terms of you know, even just like Firewise USA has tons of resources and support and other kind of things to help communities, even if it's not hard cash and money and grants. So if we just clarify it and keep it narrow, that's good, but want to make sure constituents and people in Colorado know what kinds of opportunities are out there to help as well.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same boat. I mean, why wouldn't we have a list, a comprehensive list? And, you know, forest health speaks to mitigation. I mean, that's almost in its name, right? So if you have healthy forests, fire risk goes down. So, and then the water stuff, I mean, you know, water's healthy forest, water mitigation, I mean, they all overlap each other. So why would we not want a list, a whole comprehensive list of where to get money for everybody from individuals all the way up to, you know, nonprofits, municipalities, states, you know, I mean, we want like a one-stop shop, right? So we're trying to streamline stuff. So in my opinion, it should all be together and we should list everything. It might be a long list, but at least it's there and people can reference it. So my opinion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know the Water Navigator is, you know, something I've been referencing to create this. And so maybe it doesn't even make sense that they're on two different documents. They should all just be one document. And your points about all forest health supporting mitigation make a lot of sense too. So maybe we can have some conversations around what this becomes and how it expands past just mitigation focused programs. In the future, I know I don't want to take up all of our time today on this either.
Yeah, thanks so much, Courtney. This spreadsheet is already hugely helpful, and I think that there will be a lot of good thoughts from this group on how to support your work and getting it out there and connecting the dots and making it useful. But this is a great segue to turn things over to Erin Greene and Diana Selby. So Erin, and you all may know them well, but Erin is the Associate Director of Forest Services, and Diana Selby is the Acting Associate Director of Forest Planning and Implementation. And again, you know, I think we'll have either Erin or Diana hopefully participating in most of the subcommittee meetings that they can make time for out of their busy schedules, but wanting to make sure we work in tandem with the priorities at Colorado State Forest Service staff. So I wanted to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. Diana, it'd be great just to a good segue to talk about the all programs database and some conversations as to where that goes. And then give them the opportunity just to give their thoughts on some opportunities that they see in the realm of leveraging resources. So Erin and Diana, I will turn it over to you all. Diana, I can't hear you.
Well, she's getting her audio stuff figured out. I'll just go ahead and start by a little bit of introductions. Obviously, I've met a lot of you. Appreciate the opportunity to assist in this committee of the Forest Health Council in any way that we can. And that's really what we're seeing our role here as, is just assisting and providing information. If you need anything, feel free to ask, but I'll kind of leave it to that ask. I think something that I really recognize is the difficulty of that challenge of that all-inclusive list, because every single one of those things on that list changes pretty frequently. And if you start thinking about all of the private grant opportunities that are out there through the different foundations, that gets pretty long too, right? And how these programs change year to year is not kind of on a standard cycle. They all change all the time. And so something that we have been really conscious of is trying to avoid putting out information that is incorrect or is old, and trying to make sure that the information that we supply is up to date and accurate whenever possible. And that's really the challenge when looking at some of these all-inclusive lists. But we certainly recognize that the same project could be funded with watershed money, or even wildlife money, or even recreation money, or hazardous fuels mitigation money, that's doing the exact same thing on the ground. And figuring out how to apply for those funds is really the challenge. My side of this is really out of the field offices. We've got 15 field offices spread throughout the state. And that's really the first opportunity for constituents to work with somebody who might know the ins and outs of some of these grant opportunities, to be able to match what their needs are and what their particular project is to some of those grant opportunities, that in-person contact. But that's not always the best thing, and I recognize that. But that's kind of my side of it, is that we've got professional foresters working out of offices throughout the state that really look for opportunities to match people with funds for their best interest, and not the best interest of any particular program or grant opportunity. Diana, do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about what we've got going on? I can go longer if you're still having audio problems. Not yet. Still no. One of the opportunities that I'll just mention is that recently House Bill 22-1011 provided wildfire mitigation incentives for local governments. The bill establishes the Wildfire Mitigation Incentive for Local Governments Grant Program within CSFS. This grant program is established to provide state funding assistance in the form of grant awards to local governments to match revenue raised by either those local governments or to offset funding or match required of federal grants. This bill received $10 million. Diana, are you back? You got it? No. So we're looking to develop this grant program and get some more information out to folks about how to apply for that this spring as we're looking at some of our other opportunities. We also have, through the legislature, been given an incredible increase in funding in our furworm grant program, which is listed on that document that Courtney put up earlier. The big thing about that is that we were in a place where we were only getting about $1 million a year associated with that grant, but having that funding stabilized has been really valuable and has gotten us thinking with our partners around the state about some other options. Do you want to try again, Diana, now that you reconnected? Still no. Okay, well, that increase in furworm, we're getting ready to put out some furworm grant notices out to our local partners here. But you know, in this year alone, we've got over $15 million that we're looking to award in furworm grant opportunities. In addition to some of the other federal programs and federal grants that we manage through our agency. And all of those are available on, or more information about those are available on our website. We are going through a process where we are updating our website. And I think this is the, let me see if I can find the link for those grants things and I'll put it into chat.
Thanks so much, Aaron. And Diana, you might be able to try calling in. If you go to the meeting invite, there should be some numbers. We can open it up to any questions for Aaron, but we can also switch things around if we can get Diana's audio working to talk about the statement from Chief Moore related to adjusting some of the partnership opportunities, relaxing match. Aaron had flagged that for me as just an important late breaking announcement that you know really dovetails with how do we better leverage resources given some of the direction coming from the U.S. Forest Service. But before we jump into that, any questions, comments, thoughts for Aaron?
Well, I have a question. So at the beginning of the meeting, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, but you talked about, you know, the couple 3 goals that we had for this committee is, you know, risk assessment, so GIS mapping, you know, and to identify opportunities, treatment opportunities, excuse me, and then streamlining funding and, you know, addressing barriers and stuff like that. And, you know, and I have like a little number 3 as a capacity building kind of thing. Well, I feel like, you know, those things are great, you know, the risk assessment, finding where to do a treatment, streamlining funding, you know, addressing barriers. But I feel like we're kind of missing a piece of a pie with this leveraging committee. You know, it's on the other end of that is, you know, we need foresters, we need, you know, operators, we need, you know, people to haul the wood. I mean, we can identify and have money all day long, but if we don't have the people to do it, so I don't know how we address that. I know this was talked about at the last FHA all hands meeting or whatever, you know, Mike Morgan brought this up about it's hard to hire people. I feel like this committee could look into that kind of stuff.
And thanks, John. I think, yeah, Commissioner Shattuck McNally has her hand up. I think that's been a big focus of the other subcommittee. So
Oh,
I'll turn it
okay.
over to Jody.
Yeah, thank you for your question and thank you for your comments. And yes, Mr. Morgan is on our on our legislative subcommittee. That's the subcommittee that I'm chairing, and those are conversations that we're having. We've had several presentations, and on Friday we'll be presenting kind of our high level, well, our top 3 tier 1, and then we have a tier 2 list of recommendations, and some of those do address capacity, education, workforce. And so those are things that we'll be sharing and presenting. And I'm sure if you're interested in the conversations that we have, I think Courtney and Angela have those meeting minutes and some of those presentations that are available that you're able to go back and view and catch up. But that has been a lot of a bulk of the conversations that we've been having and those concerns. And we've had some pretty amazing presentations. And some of those presentations are the same ones that were at the last Forest Health Council. From Front Range and from I forgot the group with Miss Wood. I've forgotten that name, but anyway, sorry, it's Monday. So yes, I think that it's glad to hear that this committee has some of those overlap and some of those same thoughts and concerns, and that's great to hear. And I know Christy and Ben and Pat are all on that committee as well. And so they probably saw me raise my hand like, hey, we're having those conversations. So I hope that's helpful. But yes, we are kind of focusing on some of those pieces. Oh, and Julie too. Thanks, Julie. Sorry, I see you smiling. Thank you.
And I'll just jump in here and say procedurally, this afternoon, you will all be receiving those legislative recommendations from the legislative committee. So hopefully you have some time to review those before the meeting on Thursday, when we will vote to advance any concepts to the Wildfire Matters Review Committee and our broader annual report. And, you know, I don't think it's spoiling the surprise to say that their top 2 recommendations are workforce related. And so I'm looking forward to having a robust conversation about that in our whole council Thursday meeting. And so if you do have specific suggestions about the concepts themselves, please bring your notes to that meeting, because it'll be an opportunity to have a really robust discussion.
That's great. I didn't want us to be missing that piece of the pie. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks, John. That's a good flag. Any other questions for Aaron? And I know Diana put the all programs link in the chat as well.
Can you all hear me now?
And we can hear you.
At last. Okay. I don't know. Sorry, I missed some of the discussion, so I'm not sure where we're at with that, but I'll just provide a brief update as far as this natural resource grants database that we've maintained. We know it's not comprehensive, and we have some updates to do. And so that's kind of on our plan of moving forward in the next year, is that we'll have this updated and a little bit more user friendly. So we haven't decided what exactly that's going to look like. We do have plans to hire a grants manager in our admin division, and that person would be responsible for maintaining this. Right now, we just have someone, you know, that kind of does our website stuff, and he's responsible for keeping it up to date. And it, as some folks have mentioned, it's a lot of work because there's constant changes with grants. And so we kind of want to have a more comprehensive look of what that looks like. And we have had discussions within, you know, shared stewardship conversations and others, where how can we make this user friendly and useful for as many folks as possible. So we do have plans. I think that the most current thing that we're going to do is just update it to make sure that we have, you know, all appropriate sources that are there, and the current deadlines and that kind of stuff are all up to date. And then that further look out will probably take us a little bit longer as we get that grants manager position in place in our agency and move forward with that. So I don't know if there's any questions related to that, but and I'm sorry for that. I had to skip in and out a couple of times to get this to work, but let me know.
Any questions for Aaron or Diana? All right, I'm going to transition to the letter from from the Forest Service chief. I'll put a link in the chat, but it's a great maybe conversation piece for this group of on July 22nd, there was a letter release that makes significant, I think, flexibility efforts for relaxing match requirements, making a better emphasis on in-kind contributions from partners, removing a requirement for substantial cash contributions, reducing match to as low as 5%. So I think we'll learn a lot more about how the Forest Service plans to implement some of these changes, but I wanted to make sure we flagged it for this group and had some of these conversations to turn into a discussion of where we finalize some of our committee direction and where we want to head. So given just where we're at with time, I think it would be great to open it up for a group discussion. Certainly if folks want to comment on the Forest Service letter as part of our determination of where to go next, I think that's great. And we can combine some of those discussion pieces. And I see, yeah, Christy put a note in the chat just to get us going on our mission. So maybe Christy, do you want to just walk through your thoughts?
Sure. And Amy, I just sent that to you because I didn't want to distract. But I'll bring it up real quick. Does it make any sense after hearing some of our comments here on this meeting? Does it make any sense to kind of piggyback on what the other committee has been doing and whittle down our mission to sort of basically piggyback on what they've got going on? So, for example, maybe we use this committee's efforts to leverage resources for what might be the most challenging fact facing forest health now, which would be what John Ring alluded to a minute ago with basically the lack of people who can and will do the work on the ground, actual work on the ground. Because we've got, I think we've all identified that as a big priority. But then secondly, to use like the local CSFS offices, Aaron mentioned a minute ago, there were 15 or 16 offices, and maybe we get the word out more and sort of just let them be that one-stop shop, because they're going to know locally what funding is going to match the needs better. So two-prong, in summary, two-prong, can we use this committee's resources to leverage the resources to get education, boots on the ground, get the actual, fill that gap, and then also, you know, push more people toward the local CSFS offices. That's my sort of question, maybe recommendation, thoughts from you guys. Thanks, Aaron. I got that.
Other thoughts? I think we can just open it up to the group. So feel free just to unmute as opposed to raising hands. So Pat's question to you, Christy, was, are you thinking about funding sources to add capacity?
Sure. You know, if our mission here on this, one of our missions on this committee is for leveraging resources, then do we want to try to pinpoint resources that will find funding sources to add capacity? Are we better off to work in tandem with the other committee, in other words?
So Courtney, a question for you. Does your data sheet, and I'm sorry, I'm on the phone, so I don't have access to all the fancy stuff that I can't jump onto the website, but one thing that might be important is which grants are eligible just to add capacity, right? And which ones are for implementation, project only related sources.
Yeah, Pat, that's a good question. If people read through the what is funded column, they can get to that information, but I can see a benefit of adding a whole other column that just says like capacity support, and then, you know, having like an X in each of the opportunities that does fund capacity, so people could really quickly find those opportunities. So that's a really great idea and would be a really easy thing for me to add.
Others' thoughts on Christie's proposal, or just comments on where this group focuses our efforts? I think, Courtney, if you can make some of those flags, it would be really useful just to see the slate of what could fund some of these capacity gap needs. But I'll do a long, awkward pause to allow other people to jump in too.
I think there also needs to be something like incentives for folks to get into the industry. I mean, right now, when I look at, we're trying to hire people, Colorado State Forest Service trying to hire people, United States Forest Service trying to hire, I mean, we're just robbing each other's manpower. I mean, we're not people power. We're not really gaining anything. And especially with the cost of living here, to get a GS 5-7 tech forester or fuels person or whatever, they'd rather go somewhere else where they're actually going to make money instead of paying all their money to live in a house, So I don't know if you can push, and I can't push legislation, but incentives for getting into the industry, whether it's an operator, a forester, a fuels person, a log truck driver, whatever that is. I mean, I feel like that's a piece, and like I think it was Jody was saying, I don't know what the other committee is doing, so they might already be talking about this stuff. I've even thought about really crazy stuff like remote equipment operators. They already do this in the construction, where there's, a millennial sitting behind 4 screens and driving the dozer, 300 miles away or whatever. I mean, there's tons of things that could be looked at to get people into the industry, because, coming up as a forester, it's not easy work. Your first 5 to 10 years, it's grindstone. And I don't know how many young folks want to do that anymore, to be honest with you. So we got to figure out how to get people to get into want to get into the industry, however that may be. That's my opinion. So, and like Jody was saying, I don't know what the other committee is doing, so maybe we're already treading over the same ground. So, but
just to add to what John is saying, I've been a part of national subcommittee for the U.S. Forest Service based on capacity, how they can increase capacity, what are their constraints. Their capacity is just like John's saying. They don't make enough money to afford housing. There's no housing. So I think for leveraging resources, for like the state forest council's focus, I think, on leveraging resources and what could benefit some of the federal money coming our way is increasing the workforce. The only true connection I can see, given the knowledge of their capacity challenges, is, are there state locations where the feds could use like living spaces or homes, buildings, something that they can use in the meantime, while the chief is putting in a line item for housing in the federal budget that he has to pass. And so they're talking about, a lot of money coming this way. There's no place for these workers to stay and be housed. So they're even talking to like water utilities, Denver Water, like who has facilities as a Bureau of Reclamation, maybe BLM, Park Service. It could be something that the state could think about, is what are the existing facilities where some of the foresters on the federal side could actually reside, stay temporarily. That to me is an example of being able to leverage resources that we have at the state level that this Forest Health Council could think about, and provide that as an option to the federal government, U.S. Forest Service, whoever, of a way of sharing or leveraging resources. So, yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in bunkhouses, log cabins to, Forest Service owned trailers, fifth wheels, I mean, these are a GS 5.7, there'd have to be like 5-6 of them living together to afford to live in a house here right now. I mean, we have people turning down jobs unless they're remote, and you can't obviously do, this work remote. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like the other issues, mapping and streamlining funding, those are all good efforts, and I think we'll get to those relatively quickly. It's solving the back end is who's going to be doing this stuff. So from industry to, employees. So I don't know. Yeah.
I would say it's definitely worth checking in with the other committee ideas. There's some overlap, if I'm following the conversation correctly, with existing programs. With the co-swap program, there is workforce development, but I think let's check in with at least the other committee within Forest Health. There may be also overlap with some of the direction from Fire Commission, potentially. So it's worth paying attention to all the topics.
If it's helpful, and I know, Amy, we don't have a ton of time here, I could share my screen right now and share these top recommendations that are coming your way this afternoon from the Ledge Committee, just to create that transparency for folks who aren't on both. I'll just do it real quick here, because I think it sounds to me like the question at hand is, does this committee on leveraging resources, what is that main focus in terms of leveraging resources? And if it is, trying to solve this workforce problem in tandem with the legislative push, using other methods, not sure what those are, but we could have those conversations, then that's, I think, totally a direction this group could go. So just again, to, ensure there's clear communication, the legislative committee has identified 3 top legislative recommendations that they would like to push to the full council. So these are tier 1. The first is investing in expanding forestry education in Colorado. And I won't read through all these, but they specifically are recommending investments in community colleges through the Department of Higher Education. Number 2 is investing in workforce development programs, Colorado Youth Corps Association, corrections crews, those types of hand crew programs to get folks just into the pipeline. And there's a couple existing programs that fund that work. And then the third is consistent investments in good neighbor authority. So, this is the ability for the State Forest Service to do forestry work on federal lands. Industry likes it. They think it's a well-run program, creates, robust projects that gives industry some certainty. So everyone was interested in prolonged investments here. But, to your point, John, Director McCombs, I think his big focus at the State Forest Service is around recruiting and retaining staff. And so he's undergoing, some investigations around salary modernization for the State Forest Service itself, which relates back to all of this because, as you just said, they're not going to be able to do all this great G&A and other work if they don't have the staff on hand to do it. And so I think he wants to speak more about that on Thursday. And then in terms of the sort of tier 2 recommendations, so again, if you remember back to our July 6th meeting, the full council agreed to advance up to 5 legislative recommendations to the Wildfire Matters Review Committee. So here in this tier 2, lower priority, but still of interest from the legislative committee is, as you just were talking about, investing in local, state, and federal agency planning and project management capacity. So, could the state put more dollars towards those positions for planning and implementation? And then creating incentives for private industry. A couple of things the committee landed on were a state cost share internship program, which was in a bill last year but failed. But it didn't fail because of that. It was for other reasons. So interested in bringing that back. And then additional investments in the state's Forest Business Loan Fund. And then third is investments in the state nursery, which we've spoken a bit about at previous meetings. And that's it. And there's some other concepts that didn't sort of make the top tier. So I hope that's just helpful in terms of understanding what the legislative committee is recommending and what will be the topics of discussion at Thursday's meeting.
These are great, but the one piece we're missing is the housing piece. So if you want to get, a bunch of GS 5s and 7s or a lower level, state forester, where are these people going to live? I mean, that might be a focus for us since it's not on their list. I don't know. And I don't know what that looks like, but a voucher program through the state, I have no idea. But
well, and as we wrap up on our time, I think, there's a couple areas we can continue to talk about of focusing our thought process on leveraging resources on these capacity barriers and what programs exist for capacity, whether it's housing, incentives for workforce developing. It'd be great to just see maybe some of the lay of the land of what exists. And there's probably a lot of good conversations we can have on that. And Christina, your overlap on some other subcommittees looking at that on the national level might help us with some good kind of ideas of what might work on a state level. And then continuing to look at the spreadsheet opportunities, all programs database, think about how do we push people towards people, like the Colorado State Forest Service field offices is a good place to start, and maybe how those opportunities work in tandem to highlight which programs exist. So those seem like good kind of next steps as a conversation starter. And then again, we'll have more opportunity this Thursday to dive into those recommendations that Angela shared just briefly. So I'm seeing a few head nods if that sounds like a good place for us to keep picking up on when we meet next. Okay, our next meeting does fall on Labor Day. So I'd like to propose potentially moving it to Tuesday, September 6th over the lunch hour. But I want to hear, I know our commissioners, that might be tough for them. So I'll pause here to see if anyone immediately can't make it on September 6th at noon. And we could look at shifting to another date.
Hey, Amy, I should be able to attend the September 6th at noon. I'd have a commissioner meeting that day scheduled.
I could come for 40 minutes of it. We have an office meeting starting at 12:45, so I could come for the first part of it.
Great. Does that seem like it works for most people? Okay. So we will shift our next meeting to Tuesday, September 6th. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Good discussion today. We'll see many of you again later this week at the conversation to deliberate on legislative items. Anything else, Courtney or Angela, before we wrap up? Nope.
Thanks all. Thanks, Amy.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thanks,
Thank
Amy.
you.